Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Natural Bear, and this is my thoughts on Resident Evil Village. Finally out. Been a long wait. It feels like a long wait anyway. I can't even remember when the game was really announced. I feel like it can't have been that long ago because obviously last year we had the Resident Evil 3 remake, so I feel like they wouldn't have announced Village until after remake, but I honestly can't remember. And plus, I mean, Capcom, to be fair, they usually these days they announce the game officially like less than a year before release. They're essentially doing the Bethesda thing where, you know, there's not too long of a delay between announcement and release, which I think is probably the right way to go. But nonetheless, the game's finally here, and I wanted to give my thoughts on it because I have a fair amount to say. And you know, this is a big release, right? It's, you know, Resident Evil is one of my favourite series ever. One of my first real gaming memories is playing Resident Evil 2, or more specifically watching my dad play Resident Evil 2. So it has a lot of meaning for me. I remember back in the day when I first started playing the game, I would get to the police station and then I would just reset the game and do that again. I don't know why. Partly maybe just a bit of fear about actually playing the game or something. I really don't know. It didn't help that, when I was very young, the TV I was using was a really old, shitty one, and literally every like minute or two, for some reason, you would have to hold a button on the remote to stop it like going black and white or something. I don't remember. I'm very hazy on the details, given that I was probably 5 or 6 years old. But yeah, that probably didn't help. But that was my first experience with the Resident Evil games, and since then, you know, been a big fan of the series. I did fall out of it for a few years, to the point where I didn't even play 7 on release because I was so disgusted with RE6 that and not only 6 but also the horrible spin-offs. I don't know if you remember that one year where it was like, oh, here are your Resident Evil games for the year, it's 6, and then like Operation Raccoon Shitty, ha ha ha. And there was some other fucking shit game they released as well. Like, it was really dour stuff. It was a horrible time to be a Resident Evil fan. Which I think is why RE7 was very important, because it was, you know, they had to bring the series back to a reasonable level so that the fans wouldn't fucking mutiny, you know. But we'll probably get onto that later on. But nonetheless, you know, I played 7 a couple of months after release and really liked it and felt confident about where the series was going. I thought RE2 Remake was excellent. Mostly a very faithful recreation of what made RE2 good, with a lot of new things in there as well. And then I figured RE3 Remake I don't really like. The longer the gap is between actually playing that game, the more I dislike it. It is... People like to say, well, I know it's really short and it lacks content, but what content there is really good, and my response is no, it isn't. Because it's very scripted and very linear and very railroaded. You're essentially just led from one action set piece to the next with very few sort of puzzle segments or very little quiet time, and the game's strength isn't that kind of thing. The game's strength is, the newer Resident Evil game strengths are those quiet moments where you're just kind of exploring around an environment, and the fact Nemesis was completely neutered. What an absolute pussy he is in RE3 Remake. He completely fails, for one, because he doesn't actually kill a single STARS member. But also, he's not dynamic like he should be. He is literally a worse version of Mr. X from RE2, which is just baffling that they could do it worse the second time around. I don't understand how you can take your experiences of doing one thing and then make it worse. But anyway, that's enough about RE3. And then obviously here we are with Village. So Capcom have really, you know, they've done well, right? The last 3 releases before this, one was bad, but it was kind of made quickly and on the cheap. The other 2 that they spent time on and spent some money on were really good. So my hopes were fairly high for Village, and I gotta say, it hasn't particularly disappointed. This is a very good game. That's the end of the video, guys. No. Yeah, it's a very good game. It does a lot of things very well. It has a few weird issues and things that we'll talk about, but for the most part, it's a very good attempt at kind of introducing an RE4 style to what was already good in RE7 and kind of building on that concept. But we'll get into it. The footage you're seeing in the background, by the way, is of the Mercenaries mode, because I figured it would show off some gameplay and some of the combat, but also it won't spoil anything, apart from you know, you'll get a glimpse at some of the locations you'll be visiting in the main game, but it's all early stuff. It's just the village and the castle sections, which are already shown off in not only the demos but all the pre-release trailer stuff, so you won't be spoiled. So if you just want to watch the video, it's not a problem. I'll also avoid story spoilers, and I will be talking about game mechanics, and I'll also be talking about some of the kind of locations that you'll visit, but in very broad terms. So if you want to go in absolutely, completely 100% blind, don't watch the video, because I will talk about maybe things like the pacing and the way the game is structured, but there'll be no story spoilers and very vague allusions to some things, but nothing that you could take anything from, you know. So yeah, so you should be, if you've not played the game before, you should be absolutely fine listening in. I don't think anything particularly will be spoiled, but I just wanted to put that sort of what's the word, warning. We'll just say warning because I can't think of the right word. I wanted to put that warning in there, little caveat, just in case you're unsure about spoilers, which is fair enough, really. First things first, I'm going to start with the PC port because, I mean, I played it on PC, and I mean, the console versions all run fine, and they run how you would expect a console game to run. The PC port is obviously a very different thing, so I wanted to just briefly talk about it. Overall, good PC port. All the RE Engine games have been good ports for the most part. Even RE7, which was the first RE Engine game, was a good PC port. And in fact, Capcom have got a decent history of PC ports. Not so much the older stuff. You know, Resident Evil 5, for example, was a really bad PC port. The original version of RE4 back in like 2006, 2005, if anyone remembers that, it's genuinely one of the worst PC ports ever released. And this was in the mid-2000s when console ports were bloody awful for the most part. It is basically unplayable, that original version of the game. The HD version released years later obviously works a lot better. Still not great though, I must say, but we're not talking about that. But, you know, recently, all the RE Engine stuff, for the most part, runs really well on PC. And even stuff like RE6 had a really good PC port. The game was horrible, but the PC port was good at least. No real exception here. I have really... There's 4 issues that I want to talk about. One of them might not be a PC issue. It might just be a general glitch. I don't know. But I wanted to mention it in case it's, you know... It's relevant still. First things first, the frame rate is rock solid. It stays at 60, probably 99.9% of the time. The only time for me it dropped below 60 was a very few, very specific graphical effects. For some reason, absolutely tanked the frame rate. The one I can think of in particular, very, very, very minor enemy spoiler for an early game enemy. I won't mention which one, but one of the early game enemies, they have flies going around them. And these flies, when they get in your vision, get close up to the camera, my god, they tank the frame rate. I have no idea why, but it drops to like 40, 30 frames a second for, only for a couple of seconds, but it is really weird. I don't know why that particular thing drops the frame rate, but other than that, it stayed at 60 for me, rock solid. The settings were on pretty high. I think I had everything on high pretty much. And the game ran flawlessly apart from that. I'm running a 5600 XT. So it ran absolutely fine, which is obviously a mid-range card, so if you've got a high-end card you should be able to absolutely obliterate this game, no issues. And even low-end cards, I think as long as your CPU isn't too bad, you'll be fine. I have heard of a glitch where for some people, even though their system is quite powerful, the cutscenes are running at a much lower speed than they should be, so you get audio desync. Apparently if you pause and then unpause, that sometimes fixes it. So if you are having that issue, do that. But yeah, it just seems like they're probably going to have to patch that because it seems like a relatively widespread issue. I've seen a few people complain about that. Here's a bit of problem which, for me, this wasn't a big issue at all because I don't really have issues in this department, but a lot of people do, so I really do need to mention this. There's no FOV slider, which is weird because all the other games, including the over-the-shoulder ones, had an FOV slider. And RE7 did, and it was their first attempt at a first-person game in the series outside of, the Survivors bullshit spin-offs and all that. And yet they figured out they needed that, and I'm pretty sure it was there on release, although don't quote me on that. And yet, this one doesn't have an FOV slider. I have no idea why. There's already a mod that gives you an FOV slider. It's a bit finicky, as you can imagine. It's a mod that was made within like a day. But that issue's kind of been fixed by a mod, but it should be an option in the game, and there's no reason why not. All I can think of is maybe some scripted events get messed up if the FOV slider's too high or something. But it's very narrow, the FOV. I would estimate it's probably about 70, maybe. So if you get motion sickness from low FOV, just bear that in mind. It is a real problem. Again, I personally was fine because I don't have that issue generally. Very, very rare games give me a problem, but this one didn't. But just to keep you in mind, you know, it's a thing. It is a problem. There's a weird thing with the controls as well. Again, I don't know if this is necessarily just a PC issue, but I think it was kind of an issue in RE7, just not quite as pronounced due to the way that the game kind of works. This game will require you to turn around a lot. Capcom, in their infinite wisdom, have seen the way that first-person shooters have controlled for about 20 years, well, more, and have gone, you know what, we should change this for no reason. So the game has a quick turn. A first-person game with a quick turn, that's already really weird, because when would you ever need that if you're controlling it with a mouse and keyboard, right? Now, on a console, I can sort of see that, because you do turn slower. But on PC, absolutely no need for it. But to compensate for it, almost to make it kind of needed, the sensitivity of this game is so low. Like, I had the game on max sensitivity, mouse sensitivity, which I think is 10, and I had the DPI on my mouse turned up, and it was still too slow for me, to the point where turning around, I kind of had to do it in bursts occasionally. Like, it's just really strange. And what makes it more annoying, and I think this was intentional to make the quick turn more useful, but the quick turn doesn't need to be there anyway, so I don't know what the point was overall, just to make your character a bit sluggish. If you're running or moving, not even running, if you're just walking normally, and then you try and turn around and quickly start to run in the other direction, there is a delay of about a second, maybe a bit less than that, where it's almost as though it's like in real life, if you have to turn 180 degrees and run in the other direction, there'd be a slight delay while your feet get set. It's like they've tried to recreate that, but it makes the game feel really clunky in those situations, and this happens a lot too. And I think it's to get in your mind the quick turn and having to use it and stuff. But it's a first-person game, so for me, I always forget the quick turn's there, because why would it be? It's a first-person shooter. I have never needed to quick turn in a first-person game, ever. It's such a bizarre feature, and I have no idea why it exists. I'm guessing they wanted to introduce a quick turn, because obviously the Resident Evil games have always had a quick turn, dating back to like the DualShock version of RE2 back in the day, or whatever the fuck, right? So they wanted to shoehorn it in, I guess, but it just isn't needed to be there. And there was one in RE7, which I had to Google to remind myself about. But in RE7, you very rarely have to turn and run in the opposite direction that quickly. So it wasn't really much of an issue in that game. Whereas in this one, the enemies are generally more mobile, and there are more of them, so you have to turn around and run quite a lot. And it's very slow and sluggish. I don't know what the hell they were thinking with that one. Finally, there's a glitch with the grenade launcher where, when you pull the weapon out, to switch grenades, it wouldn't work for me. I had to aim down sights for a second and then switch grenades. I have no idea why that is a thing. I don't know if this is just a PC-specific issue, if it's just a general issue. It could even just be an issue I'm having. I genuinely don't know. But just to keep you informed that's a thing, apparently. I don't know. If it's an issue on my end, ignore that. But I honestly don't know. I imagine that will get patched pretty quickly, because it doesn't seem like it's particularly difficult to fix, but then again, I'm not a programmer, so I don't really know. Okay, that's the PC stuff out of the way. Long story short, very good port. We will touch on something else later, but that's related to more game mechanics that's kind of makes the game a bit... Well, we'll get to it. We'll touch on the graphics quickly. Really good looking game. Very good texture quality. The lighting is beautiful in this game. It really is. The RE engine is stunning at lighting. It is the one thing it seems to do incredibly well. Also, really good character models. Very high quality. Lip syncing's good. The facial animations are very good. Very good looking game. And again, scales well as well. So the RE engine is very well programmed, clearly. So I've got to give credit to Capcom. Hair physics are still messed up. If you remember RE7, Mia's hair looked awful, and it still kind of does in this game. They haven't quite figured out hair yet. I don't know, maybe if that's just an inherent problem with the engine, or if it's just something that Capcom internally can't figure out. I don't know what's going on with that, but it's a minor issue anyway. And also, the game has a similar colour palette to RE7, quite muted colours, lots of, sort of greys and browns and that kind of thing. So not really colourful as such. But there's more variety in the actual environments themselves, and I think that means the graphics kind of stand out more. So, yeah, seems like a good evolution over 7, looks really good, and runs well as well. So I've got no real complaints about the graphics. Here aside, good stuff. The And then to touch on the sound as well, the soundtrack's pretty good. Very good atmosphere. There's a couple of sections that, yeah, they do a great job of building up the game. The intro of the game, the opening sort of 10-15 minutes, do a really good job. And there's also a section a little bit later on that is some prime stuff, I tell you. I won't spoil it though, obviously. The voice acting, very cheesy, fits the tone well though, you have to say. And there's no character that stood out to me as being like a weak performance in the cast. Other than occasionally Ethan's voice actor, there's like one line reading right at the start in particular that I was like, this is really strange because... Well, I can talk about this actually because it's in the trailer. Right at the beginning when Ethan shouts, "Why?" to a certain thing happening, which I won't mention just in case, but a certain thing happens, a quite horrible thing, and he shouts, in the trailer he shouts, "Why?" And the way he shouts it is very heartfelt, and you can hear the pain in his voice. In this, for some reason in the final release, they replaced it to him just kind of going, "What? Why?" In that tone of voice, with that urgency, and given what he has just seen, he should be a lot more worried than that. So it's very strange. I don't know why they replaced that, and it kind of stands out as, I have no idea. It's very strange. But other than that weird thing, good performances across the board. Even some of the side characters are very well performed. There's one in particular quite early on, one of the villagers, she is very well voice acted, given that she's a relatively minor character. So yeah, happy with the voice acting overall. The performances that are cheesy, they fit the tone, so it's all good stuff. Right, gameplay is the probably the most it is the most important bit. Let's be real. So this game, and we are going to talk about some of the game's mechanics and also the way the game is laid out and structured. So if you don't want any of that spoiled, then skip forward or whatever, or probably don't watch the rest of this video, to be honest, because we're going to talk about that and then some of the story stuff, which again, I'm not going to spoil any events, but we might go into some of the themes and things like that. So this is where I would turn the video off if you want to go in completely blind. All I'll say to those people is, game's really good, play it. There. Now they've gone. Let's pull out the drugs. They've all gone home. No. So the way the game works is, the village, the titular village, it's like a hub area where there's different sort of side areas that you can explore. It's very Metroidvania, right? So, for example, early on in the game, you'll see a door that's locked and it has a weird symbol on the door. And then hours later, you'll find the key for that door, and then you can come back to it and you'll get a new weapon or some ammo or a treasure that you can sell to the merchant or whatever, right? So it encourages exploration, but also it familiarizes you with the village. You start to build up a picture in your head of where things are and stuff like that. And the village starts to become this almost like a character in its own sort of way, which I think was one of their intentions when they were making the game. That's why the game is called Village, because they really wanted to emphasize the village as like a thing, So they do a really good job of that, I have to say. And with the amount of side content that's in the village too, things like I say, extra weapons and upgrades and things like that you can find. There's even a system for you can hunt animals, and the merchant, the Duke as he's called in this game, he has recipes which will give you permanent stat boosts like extra health, movement speed, that sort of thing. So you can take like meat and fish to him and he'll create a meal for you, and then that meal will give you permanent stat boosts. Just little things like that. They're not needed, but they're a nice little side distraction, something for the completionists. And obviously for the harder difficulty settings, it's probably important you get these in place because, game can be quite difficult on the hardest difficulty. Haven't played it myself, but I've heard some things. So that's really cool, good stuff. And they also, what they do with the actual main meat of the game is you've got the village in the middle, and then there's 4 paths that go to the different places, and they're the 4 main sections of the game, if you like. That's really cool. It feels like, because you keep coming back to the village and all that, you gain a familiarity, but also the village, like, it spawns new enemies every time you come in. So exploring can be a risk, And also the 4 offshoots, they almost mark tonal shifts in the game. Each area is completely different. it's a really cool idea, really cool concept. And what it does mean is, and this is great from a designer's point of view, if they had an idea about something they hadn't done in the series before, like, you know, I don't think it's a spoiler at this point to say the game has werewolves in it, right? So it's like, okay, we want to do lichens, werewolves, whatever the fuck. Let's do that, you know, because it could be one section of this 4-part game, and it's not really messing with any of the other sections necessarily. You can, you know, you can do more of a scattershot approach where you can try different things and experiment, and maybe in the future they look at a section and go, that worked really well, let's take that into a full concept, you know? So I like that idea. Great for the designers. It means people can just throw ideas out there and they can give it a try. Good stuff. Also means theoretically there should be something that everyone will like, but obviously that's not necessarily the case. But, you know, but it's all, despite the weird disparate tones, it still kind of fits together really well, which is a bit strange that they've managed that, but they just sort of worked out that way. Very RE4 in that sense, in that RE4 has a bunch of weird stuff going on, and just kind of, you can tell it was made almost in a panic. The designers were like, we've been making this game for God knows how long now, let's just start throwing stuff at the wall. And yet it kind of fits together. It's very strange. Probably because the game doesn't take itself too seriously, which I think is a big part of it. So the 4 sections, we'll just mention the themes that they all kind of build around. So you've got a gothic horror kind of section, which is, I think, it's not really a spoiler to say that's the castle. It was a demo. It's in all the trailers. So that's kind of gothic-y horror sort of thing. But then you've got the other 3 sections, which I won't talk about other than to say there's a more of a psychological horror kind of section. There is a section that's kind of Lovecraftian, dare I say. And then there's the sort of industrial sci-fi kind of area. It's very all over the place, the tone, but again it works, and I can't really explain why other than to say the game doesn't take itself seriously at all. The game is a lot more action focused than RE7, I will say that, but it doesn't neglect puzzles either. So if you're looking for that puzzle experience, you won't be too disappointed, I don't think. The game does lean on action more towards the end, but I wouldn't say overly so. I never felt at any point that they went too far with it, like they did with, you know, parts of RE5 and then definitely RE6. I felt like they kind of knew where to draw the line this time. I think they've learned from those experiences. They've learned from what the fans like and don't like. And so I think they found a pretty good balance with this game. There is a problem with the difficulties. Standard is way too easy. I played Standard. Well, originally, I played the game on Hardcore. I started the game on Hardcore. The first section of the game where there's a big attack, that all the lichens attack you in the village, and there's like a survival section. It's very much like the village section from RE4, right? Very similar. That section on Hardcore is horribly designed for a first-time playthrough. There is absolutely no way you are intended to finish that section on New Game on Hardcore. It is broken how broken that section is. Wait, how broken? Did I just say broken twice? Whatever. It is crazy how broken that section is probably a better way of putting it. Enemies can take like 15 shots to kill. They don't even flinch half of the time when you do shoot them, whereas on Standard they do. They also move faster on Hardcore, so you have less time to react to their attacks, and they also are harder to hit because they move more erratically. And you are attacked by so many of them. Honestly, it feels like originally Hardcore was supposed to be like New Game Plus sort of thing, but then they very quickly pivoted away from that, but then they just didn't rebalance the opening section, because after that, it seems fine, honestly, the balance. It's still difficult, but it doesn't feel unfair. So I don't know what's going on there. The 2 modes should have been balanced. Standard should be made slightly harder, and Hardcore should be slightly easier, I think. If you're going to play New Game Plus on Hardcore, that seems fine, so, you know, I would wait until New Game Plus if you're going to play on Hardcore. I did not enjoy my time with the game when I was playing on Hardcore. I very quickly had to restart the game and play it on Standard, and that was much more fun. Because that's another thing too, you can't turn the difficulty down unless you start a new game, which I think is ridiculous. So make sure that you're keeping that in mind when you decide to play a new game. Again, go for Standard. It is too easy, but it's one of them things. What can you do? The pacing of the game, it's good, but it could be better. 2 specific issues. The 3rd section is way too short. It's good, but it's short. It's basically just an action set piece, and that's it, pretty much, with a boss fight at the end. Way too short. Should have been longer. They could have done more with the concept. Also, the character that section is based around is like one of my favourite new villains because of how stupid he is. It's great. The fourth section of the game is way too long. Specifically because they throw in a boss fight in there at one point. A really boring boss fight that genuinely feels like it was like Babby's first... All I can describe it as is like Babby's first boss fight. It's what a designer will make as his first boss fight when he knows the basics of making a boss, but doesn't really have the creativity to go beyond those borders yet. So it's the kind of thing where, you know, an indie developer will just put it in his first game and it'll be like, okay, next time I can do better than this, but this is fine to just test things, you know, that kind of thing. Really boring boss fight with no interesting mechanics whatsoever, really dull. And then after that is the actual boss fight for the area, which is way better and way more fun. So I have no idea why they threw this other boss fight in, especially when it's right before another one. It feels like maybe a last minute addition. I don't know what went on there. Just didn't quite come together, unfortunately. But other than that, the pacing's pretty solid. This is a PC-specific thing. The game is not really balanced for mouse and keyboard because enemies move really slowly. And I think their intention is, well, you're aiming with a controller, so we need to make these enemies move slowly so you can actually shoot their weak spots, whether it's just shooting an enemy's head or obviously the bosses have weak points because, you know, Resident Evil games. Shoot the glowing thing is usually how you beat most bosses in these games. They did not take into account the fact that with a mouse, I can very quickly and much more accurately aim at things. So you will find, I think that contributes actually to why standard feels a bit too easy. I think maybe on console you won't have that problem. On PC, I definitely had that problem. The sniper rifle in particular, completely broken on PC because you can just immediately zoom in, headshot, and you can wipe like 4 enemies out in about 4 seconds. It shouldn't really be a thing. It's kind of broken. But again, I think that's a PC specific issue. So, but no, the game plays very well. It's, you know, the combat is very similar to 7, but they've improved it. It flows a bit better and that kind of thing. And they expand on the combat as you go on, you know, because there's an upgrade system so you can upgrade your weapons and things like that. And you find a lot of new weapons and stuff as well. So they keep things fresh. They introduce new enemies regularly. It does not have, I should have mentioned that, I didn't write this in my notes, but RE7 had one specific big problem, which was that the enemy variety was almost non-existent. This game fixes that problem. There are a lot more types of enemies. So if that was one of your problems with 7, this game fixes it. So I'm very happy to say that. And I know for me personally, I didn't mind that 7 only really had like, how many enemy types did it even have? Like 3, if you don't count any of the special enemies or whatever. You know, I never was really bothered by that personally because I understood that 7 was supposed to be a much more scaled down experience, and so, you know, it was all part of the learning experience of making their first ever sort of major first-person game in the series, so I understood it. But, yeah, I can certainly see why people might have had an issue with that, and this game does fix it, so thumbs up. That's Capcom learning from their experiences and learning from people's feedback, which is great. Because they don't always do that, funnily enough. It took them a long time to realise they were killing the Resident Evil series dead in its tracks. We'll talk about the story quickly. Again, there'll be no specifics, no spoilers, but I will talk about some vague things. So, again, if you don't want to know story stuff, then skip forward or stop watching. The story should not work. The tone, as I mentioned before, all over the place, and that extends also to the narrative. There are some ridiculous characters in this game. Absolutely ridiculous. And there's the fact that the game has these 4 different sections that all do different things, it should be a mess. It should be like, funnily enough, RE6, which had 4 different campaigns of varying styles and certainly varying quality. The thing that held RE6s together in theory was just an increased focus on action, but the problem is the action was so bad, quite frankly, the controls and the combat being so dated and really just not fun at all, and the pacing being absolute dog shit in that game. It just combined to make the game feel completely unimportant, despite the fact it had so much content. None of it mattered, you know, because all of it was bad. You know, Leon's campaign being slightly less shit than the other 3, but that's still not really much of a piece of praise, is it? This game does things a lot differently because the tones, it doesn't even have that to hold it together. There's nothing holding together these 4 sections at all, apart from the overarching narrative goal of the game, obviously. Other than that, there's nothing holding these sections together, and yet it works because the game doesn't take itself seriously. it has the RE4 thing where the dialogue is really dumb and the villains are mostly just complete goofballs. It has a rival to me with Salazar from RE4. Salazar was my favourite RE4 or Resident Evil villain because of how dumb he was. Why was this guy, Spanish fella, Napoleon hat, about yay big, probably like 3 foot tall, weird looking bloke, could have been literally any age between 12 and 120. You couldn't tell if he was like supposed to be like a young old man or an old young man, or was he like a Benjamin Button thing where he was aging backwards? What the hell was going on with this guy? He's got ridiculous dialogue, stupid things that he comes out with, ridiculous scripts. The whole concept is so dumb. His castle is literally like what you would find. I don't even know what. I can't even explain his castle. It's like something out of a fucking Disney movie sometimes with the stupid traps and things that are completely impractical. Which gets capped off, I think, when the giant statue of himself chases you at one point and destroys like half of the fucking castle. The game is ridiculous, but that part in particular. But I loved it because the game was just throwing its hands up and saying, look, this series is dumb and stupid. Let's just be dumb and stupid. This game does that a little bit. Not as much, nowhere near as much as RE4. It at least tries to take itself seriously, which actually is a bit of a problem to a degree, because it tries to be serious at the end, and it's like, 3 hours ago I was doing, I won't say what, but I was doing stupid shit 3 hours ago that was just ridiculous, and I was laughing and laughing and laughing, and now it's like, oh, we've got to make you care suddenly about the characters. It's like, but I don't, because I've just seen what they've just done. It's stupid, right? Just stick with that tone. Be ridiculous. At no point in RE4 did they give a shit about making you care about anything. So why they decided to try and do that towards the end, I don't know. But it's not a big issue, honestly. And they did a competent job. I just think the actual act of doing it was probably a mistake. And then also, the game does a good job of it. Kind of some characters' stories, it seems like, have been put to bed, maybe. And other characters now have new story arcs. So I think they've left themselves quite open to where they can take this story further, possibly, but they could also go in a completely different direction. They've left themselves open. It means the next Resident Evil, they can basically do what they want, which is a nice place to be in, certainly from a design point of view. The designers and the producers on the game and the series will be thinking, great, because we're not tied to anything now, really. You know, because I think if they didn't carry on some of these character stories, it wouldn't be a disaster. They've left it in a place where you can leave it there if you want to. There's one exception. There's one character where I think they have to do more with them, but anyone else, not really. They can just kind of leave it if they want to. So that's good. They've left it in a nice spot. Yeah, overall, if I had to give my thoughts, I would say this is the second best action-focused Resident Evil in the entire series, because it's not quite as good as 4. This is me talking, though. I absolutely love RE4. It's one of my favourite games ever. But it's not, honestly, it's not that far off. And obviously, mechanically, it's a lot more up-to-date and a lot more, you know, it's not as old-fashioned as RE4 is in some aspects. So clearly it's going to be superior for people that don't have like a nostalgic attachment to 4. I think they're probably going to prefer this game, if not mechanically, if nothing else, right? But it's clearly the second best action-focused one, because it's way better than 5. It's leagues above 6, and it's way better than all the shitty spin-offs they did. You know, Operation Raccoon City and Umbrella Corps and all that bollocks, right? So yeah, really, really good stuff. Good game. Improves a lot on RE7. Certainly in terms of its mechanics. You can tell that the game, or that the developers, excuse me, they have had a year. They've had a game of first-person style action under their belt now. They know what works in this style. They know what kind of doesn't work so well, and they doesn't have the RE7 problem where the last sort of third of the game is kind of bad. You know, this game does not have that dip in quality. I won't lie. There is a dip in quality, but it's not anywhere near as bad as RE7's dip, I wouldn't say. And I'm someone who kind of doesn't mind RE7's last third, even though it is a lot weaker. I'm still okay with it, but a lot of people really hate the last third of the game. This game does not have that. It does get weaker, but not massively so. And put it this way, basically every Resident Evil game is weaker in the last act. I think actually the only exception off the top of my head is probably Resident Evil 3, the original, Nemesis, where the last part of the game is actually in the factory is a really cool section that I love. When I replayed the game recently, it was great. And the soundtrack in that section is phenomenal. So that's good. It's more consistent. What it does lack from 7, and this might be a problem for a lot of people because 7 did get a lot of praise for this, it lacks 7's kind of more intimate style of horror. It's much more personal, and it was quite subtle at times. 7 was very much Ethan's story, and it was a very personal story about him going through this horrific situation. And the reason it worked as a first-person game was because you empathise with him and it literally put you inside his head, right? This game does not have that. It is a lot less subtle. It's a lot slicker. Has better combat, way better boss fights, by the way. Thumbs up, they've learned. Apart from the one exception, way better boss fights. And mechanically, it's a far better game, I would say. But it does lack some of 7's subtlety. It lacks some of 7's more small-scale things. It makes sense. Village is a natural escalation on 7. That makes perfect sense as a sequel, that you want to escalate the stakes a little bit. And add new things, but at the same time 7 had those sort of, it was a more personal story, and I feel like you got to spend more time contemplating that story, whereas in Village it kind of keeps moving you on from one sort of set piece to the next. It's just a different design philosophy. Some people prefer it, some people won't, but I just wanted to point that out because it's important that people know that these things are a thing, right? It's just a different way of making your game, and I think it's cool that the designers are comfortable enough now with not only what they've done in the recent history, but also with their own skills, that they can do that kind of thing. They can try different things, and they're willing to kind of push the boundaries without overstepping them. I think they found that balance which wasn't there back in the day when they were doing 6 and Raccoon City and Umbrella Corps. They've found where the line is that fans will want them to stick to, and they stick to that line. They don't go over it. That's great, because it does bode well for the future. Whether they'll overstep again, possibly. RE3 Remake shows that they can still make mistakes, but I think the series is in a very good spot right now. It has the respect back. It's earned its respect back. It's been a long process, but they did all the right things. They said all the right things. They've hunkered down, and they've let the games speak for themselves. I think they've done a good job, and they're in a really good spot now. So I'm optimistic for the future. And again, because of what I mentioned earlier about some characters can be explored and some of them have kind of ended, they're very open to kind of do whatever for their next game. I know the leaks, Capcom had that leak, of course, last year. Those arsehole, I can't remember what it's called now. It's basically where you hold company secrets hostage in exchange for money or whatever. It's like a ransom thing. The leaks did imply that the next game in the series will be Revelations 3, followed by the Resident Evil 4 remake. Whether that's still true, I don't know. Revelations 3, they can kind of do what they want, because Revelations 2 is very different from the first one. So that series just seems to be the place where they just try new shit, which is great for me, you know, go for it. And then obviously if they do remake Resident Evil 4, this game does hint at it because the structure is very similar to Resident Evil 4 in a lot of places. There's a lot of nods and things like that. So if you're a Resident Evil 4 fan, there'll be a lot of times in this game you'll go, oh, it's that thing that was in 4. You know, it's good stuff. Nice little references here and there. It shows that they're respecting their history while keeping the series moving. I personally do not want to see an RE4 remake because I love that game to death, and a remake would probably miss the point. And I'm just skeptical about why it's needed. 4 still holds up fairly well. It's very old-fashioned in its control methods and things like that. But once you get your head around them, it's a great bit of fun, you know? But whatever. I mean, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt for now because, you know, they've earned it, actually. There's a time when I would not give Capcom any benefit of the doubt whatsoever. In fact, I didn't even buy RE7 on release. I didn't bother with it because I just wasn't interested, frankly. I just, well, it was another Resident Evil game. It would be terrible. But I was wrong about that, and since then they've earned my trust back. So hopefully they can keep hold of it, but we'll see what happens. But point is, very good entry into the series, curious about where they go, does a lot of things really well, has a few shortcomings here and there, good PC port apart from some very minor issues, and I'm excited to see where the series goes. So yeah, we'll see what happens. Thanks for watching, everyone. Sorry it was so long. It's nearly 40 minutes, for Christ's sake. I mean, don't you have anything better to do? Apparently not, because you're still here. But yeah, thanks for watching, and we'll be back with more soon. I think the next video, it will either be another shit game showcase, which I haven't done one of those for years, but I'll see what bad games I've got and see if I can dive in. Or we'll be doing another survival horror video. Probably more likely the latter, but we'll see what happens. I don't know. My brain just seems to randomly decide to do things depending on what day it is, so, you know, what can you do? Anyway, take care, everyone, and hope you all have a great day. Thanks. Bye.